The Buffalo Bills are building the greatest NFL stadium there's ever been or ever will be. Today I'm explaining exactly why on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of. The Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph, and here we go. We're talking about the Bills' brand new stadium, currently under construction, right across the street from the existing Highmark Stadium, right across good old Abbott Road. And we're going to get into a lot of facets about the stadium as we see on the monitor here behind us. But first of all, I want to stick in a quick side note. This is not a Stephon Diggs jersey. It's a Mike White jersey. Come on. He was the honorary captain this week when Josh, I believe, was off getting married or something like that. And at any rate, that aside, because I don't want to hear anything about Stephon Diggs, except the fact that the way he's carrying on at the Patriots still seems like he's a Bills fan. It's good to hear. But we're going to get into the new stadium, and I've got 5 areas I'm going to talk about to describe how the stadium is going to be that best stadium in the NFL ever, as I have stated earlier. We're going to start out with a fan experience, what fans can expect to see, feel, and hear on game day. Then we'll move into what I call weathering the storm. The existing Highmark Stadium has had problems with weather, especially wind, a little bit with snow. We're going to talk about why the new stadium solves most of these problems. Then we'll get into the cost myths, which I shall be destroying with extreme prejudice. The stadium costs are blown out of proportion in terms of who thinks who is paying what. We're going to straighten it out on that matter. And then the PSLs and ticket prices. Of course, a lot of Bills fans feel like they've been priced out of the stadium by the PSLs. PSLs are an unfortunate reality of the NFL, and we'll talk about that in the ticket prices. And then finally, I will get into the naming rights situation about the stadium. I think the naming rights situation is wrong, as you can see how I've stated it there. And we're going to talk about what the Bills might be able to do to name the stadium differently with an idea I have, and we'll have that for the very last segment on the show. So let's go ahead and get into it. We're going right now. All right, so the Buffalo Bills are building the greatest stadium ever conceived in the NFL. Let's talk about why, and we'll get into some of the particulars to start with here. First, the planned completion of the stadium is about a year from now in June 2026 in preparation for the Bills' preseason, regular season, and postseason campaigns of the 2026 season. It is located right across Abbott Road, good old Abbott Road, right across the street from the existing stadium. This is all on lands that originally were part of Erie Community College, owned by the County of Erie. That's why the existing stadium got there in the first place in the early 70s, and now why it's very convenient to have the new stadium located in the same spot. And one of the reasons for that is, aside from people stating, well, why didn't it go downtown Buffalo or someplace else? You have a tailgating situation around the existing stadium that is unmatched anywhere in the league. The atmosphere, the enthusiasm, the tradition. There are tailgating lots and places, everything from the camper lot in the regular parking lots to residences that have hosted tailgate parties for years and years and years with the same people, game in, game out, season out. Those are traditions you can't break, and that's one of the great things about the area, and those traditions will remain in place because the stadium, the new stadium, is right across the street from the old. Now, there's normally a couple of questions about the stadium and the build. For example, why was it built without a roof? And isn't it for other things like concerts and so forth? Listen, the stadium was built for the express purpose of watching professional football. It is perfect for that. The sightlines are perfect for it. It's not designed to host concerts in the middle of March with a dome over the top. It's not designed to host tractor pulls or rodeos or whatever else you might want to do in the stadium other than football. It's specifically for that purpose, and that's how Terry Pegula wanted it. And since he's paying as much as he is for it, as we'll get into in a couple segments from now, he should have it that way, and Bills Mafia should have it that way also. Now there's the question of where's the roof on the stadium? You're in Buffalo. Why in God's name would you not put a roof on the stadium? Because this is Buffalo and because it's football. Football is intended to be played out of doors. And the late season weather that Buffalo experiences can be a great advantage for the Bills. Great home field advantage late. And of course, there are problems that the weather creates, but we'll get into what this new stadium does to solve those in our next segment. But a few other questions that come up that are kind of silly ones. Are the Bills on the shaded side of the stadium? Yes, they absolutely are. And mind you, you must calculate the shaded side of the stadium based on the time of year. Measuring it in May or June will give you different sun angles than you'll have in the fall. So the Bills will not only be on the shaded side of the stadium, but our opponents will be on the sunny side of the field and will kind of have some sun in their eyes when they're on that sideline based on how low the sun is when we get into fall and late fall and winter in Western New York. Next, the seating capacity of the new stadium is 62,000. An additional 5,000 can fit into standing room only area that has been developed on the southeast end of the stadium opposite the scoreboard. And that is actually a very unusual situation in the NFL. You do not have standing room situations, but it's perfect for Bills Mafia, obviously. Another great thing about the stadium, it will be the 5G connectivity. It will be the most connected stadium in the league in terms of access to any types of media you want to enjoy during the game, before the game, and whatever you care to listen to and however you care to consume the game. The sight lines in the stadium are awesome. Every seat is designed to have a perfect view of the stadium, and even from the concourses, there is a great view of the field. So when you get up from your seat to go wherever, you can still have a look at what's going on the field. And as far as those sight lines go, the crowd is really on top of the field in this stadium. It's far different, and it's easiest to explain when we look at a couple of images. This is what the Bills are coming from, and this is what they're going to. Now, you could tell by looking at these images that the new stadium appears to be much more stacked. The fans are far more on top of the football field. That's a great thing, and we'll explain why in a couple of regards here, but it's easily shown if we take a look at this image here, which is kind of a cross-section. Let's back out of this and then take a look at first the existing stadium. And we see here we've got the field, the lower bowl, and the upper decks, and of course, no canopy on top. Now, we can superimpose a layout of the new stadium relative to where seats actually are, and we notice a couple of things. First of all, let's get in closer here. This top row is about 14 feet higher and 40 feet closer to the field than this top row seat in the existing stadium. And in fact, if we zoom out here, what we see, the distance from this top row seat in the upper deck in the existing stadium to this one is about 440 feet. It's about 80 feet less between these two. That means you've got all these fans that are around what used to be the upper part of the upper deck. You've moved that closer to the field and wrapped it completely around the stadium. They are on top of the field, and this is why it will be one of the reasons it'll be the greatest stadium. But one of the facets of being the greatest stadium would be the loudest stadium. And we'll look here and see why. Because in the existing stadium, with our blue upper deck here, sound from this portion of the fan base is just going up into the heavens. But if we go ahead and remove that look and look at the new and see our canopy here, this canopy, which is an ingenious design, and we'll cover a lot of what it does in our next segment with weather, but the undersurface of it, that surface which is exposed to the fans, is corrugated stainless steel panel. It is reflective as hell. And all of the sound coming from these fans is going to bounce off these panels directly down onto the football field. This will be the loudest stadium in the NFL without a question, Bills Mafia is already the loudest and most raucous fan base, and now they've got a musical instrument to blast this down on the opposing teams, and it will be awesome. And if that's not enough for the sound, installed underneath this canopy will be a sound system that consists of 32 placements of speaker packages suspended above the fans. Each of those weighs about 6,000 pounds, which means you're going to have 96 tons of speakers in this stadium. And that's just what's attached to the canopy that's blasting down onto the field. Again, this will be the loudest stadium in the NFL. It won't even be close. Bills Mafia has always been the loudest crowd. Again, now they've got the musical instrument to actually do it with. Now, the other thing to talk about with the stadium is that the canopy does cover 64% of the crowd, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the Weathering the Storm section of the podcast. But the fact is that this overhanging canopy is ingenious for a number of other reasons. It also has the lighting on it. Of course, we see when we come up to the existing stadium, the first thing you can see from afar is the light poles on the Ralph that are above the upper decks on either side. This stadium will be much more imposing to the skyline of Orchard Park and than the existing one, and it should be because this is Bills Mafia. So you've got a sound system, you've got the canopy coverage, you've got the 5G, you've got the sight lines, you've got everything going on to make this the greatest stadium in the NFL for viewing football. But there's more, because now we're going to talk about the Weathering the Storm section, why the stadium is so awesome for fighting this, and let's get into it right now. So we've just gotten done talking about the fan experience at the new Highmark Stadium, the NFL palace the Bills are constructing. But we haven't talked at all about the player experience. And I don't know how that fits into weather. Not the locker rooms that are state-of-the-art. Certainly not the fact that there's tunnels for both teams. Now the Bills don't have to walk up the tunnel with the likes of the Jets anymore while playing a home game. But the one thing that has to do with the weather is the field. Because now, for the first time since 1972, in the old rock pile, the Bills will be playing on a natural grass surface. But whereas the rock pile could turn into a mud pit, that won't be the case here. This state-of-the-art field, all natural grass, will have subcoil heating, sub-air, irrigation, and the grass will be grown by artificial grow lights that are part of the stadium installation. That's how we're going to be able to have games there in the middle of January with a nice field. Now, the field, of course, is heated. This will not prevent snow from building up on the field. Snow could build up, and it would get melted slowly. But the field will not freeze. And, of course, even in the winter on an artificial surface, that field was hard at the Ralph. We can probably recall games of hard hits down on that turf with concrete not too far beneath it. The Bills will now have at home a natural grass surface, not only to win on, but for the first time in decades, the Bills will be able to circle the wagons on grass. Hasn't that been the most talked about phrase for the Bills for years? The home field advantage we have with the cold and perhaps snow that we get late in the season. But of course, one of the big problems with the weather is when there's too much snow and it fills up the stadium, and when there's too much wind that blows goalposts sideways, like we had in the very last game of the season in 2008 in the Ralph, and like we had when Mac Jones won a no-pass game against the Bills because of the wind. And why does the new stadium take care of these problems? I'm going to tell you, and the design is ingenious. Let's first get a look at, if we could bring this up here. Here we go. We've got a video here, courtesy of Joe at the Gorilla Garage right down Abbott Road, and his channel is Buffalo Stadium Live, and he's been kind enough to supply me with this footage, drone footage that he takes about every month or so. And you must also look at his channel because he's got a live streaming all-day cam showing you construction of the stadium. And we're moving around here. This was actually just taken May 26th. You can see that the stainless steel that I spoke of earlier that will be the reflective surface beneath for the fans. That's what we're seeing there. And what we're also seeing as we go around this video, which is kind of bright, it was a sunny day, this section we're seeing here of sort of darker panels, and we're going to go ahead and stop it right here. This is the world's largest snow melt system ever devised for a building. We know how much snow can arrive at the Ralph when it's the right time of year. And the issue with having a canopy over the stadium or even a dome is snow. We recall when the Minneapolis Stadium, whatever that was called, caved in on its roof, but that was actually a sort of a fabric type of roof situation. Don't know how they got by with that. This canopy is very, very sturdy and can accommodate 7 feet of snow, but we want to get rid of it. This snow melt system is what we see right in here that enables, and let's go ahead and play this again, that enables the snow to be melted away and drained off. That's an automatic system that comes on when there is sensing of snow and temperature, and that is one of the greatest inventions of this stadium. We're going to stop it once more here and then talk about snow in another respect. When we go back and look at the original stadium here, we see how far it was dug into the ground, but how much exposure there is, length from this end to this end. And when you have snow coming at an angle, you can see how one end of the stadium could fill up so much, because it is a great distance that the snow can fetch into from one end of the structure to the other. On the other hand, when we get into the new stadium with its canopy, and then go ahead and take a look at the fetch across here from canopy edge to canopy edge, you can see that the snow coming in at an angle has far less of a chance of accumulating because there's far less distance for it to fall in. Yes, there still will be snow within the stadium, but snow games are fun. We've only had a couple canceled, but that was not because of problems at the stadium. It was problems in the surrounding area where people just couldn't get to a game because of the snow. Nothing to do with the stadium. Wind has always been the biggest problem at the existing stadium, the biggest weather issue. How is that going to be solved in the new stadium? Let's get into it right here. Again, we've got the cross-section of the new stadium here at the 50-yard line, and we're going to talk about several things here. Starting, we've got exterior metal cladding on the sides of the stadium that are perforated. The cladding is actually perforated, small holes. And what happens with that? Well, when wind passes over a surface normally, you created a boundary layer. This is fluid dynamics. And that boundary layer acts almost like cooking oil that allows the air above it to slide past and stick to it. And in the case of the existing stadium, ride down in the stadium and swirl and so forth, such as it has. The idea with the perforations is that when air passes across them, small eddies happen at the surface that disrupt the boundary layer. And when that occurs, you have turbulence preventing that boundary layer, which moves the turbulence out farther and interrupts the flow. Now, the flow will still get up to the top of the stadium here, but when it comes over the top, it's going to spill over and circle around in what's called vortex shedding. Normally, if this were seats, like in the old stadium, that would spill right down into the stadium. Now, it hits at this downward section of the canopy, and then the further flow will hit the upward section of the canopy. So that also defeats the wind, and we'll end up having this turbulent situation of air directly above the stadium, and that turbulence is good. That means air isn't moving in any one direction, which would make the conditions on the field, which is 151 feet below the top of this canopy. The existing stadium, the upper deck only reaches 60 feet above ground, and that's 110 feet to the field level with no canopy at all because the field is 50 feet below ground in the existing stadium. The new stadium, the field is 35 feet below ground, and then you've got the top of the canopy 151 feet above the field surface. Guys, there's not going to be air moving down at the surface of the field. It will all be turbulent. Whatever is going on above the stadium, down at the field level, it'll be fine, and fans will be quite comfortable too. And we might make a kick that actually gets us past the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Nah, the Chiefs won't be worth a shit by the time the stadium is done. Mark my words. But let's move on here. We're going to talk next about cost myths with the stadium. Stick with me. Okay, next we're going to get into the cost myths, and I have a number of them to destroy. But the first one isn't about cost at all, and that is this business that the stadium is somehow way behind schedule, won't be ready for the start of the 2026 season. I heard some joker out there saying it's not going to be done until December. There is no indication of that coming from anyone, including the Bills or New York State or anyone with a position of responsibility with the stadium. So let's dispel with that one right now. But then let's get into these cost myths. And I'll tell you the story of how this got going. The initial design of the stadium was created. Details were done. Focus groups were accomplished. And it was determined that the stadium would cost $1.4 billion to construct. So that $1.4 billion was divided up. $850 million from taxpayers and the remainder from Terry Pegula. The $850 million from the taxpayers was made up of $600 million that was earmarked to come from the state of New York. Another $250 million would come from Erie County. That creates the $850 from the taxpayers. And then Terry Pegula was going to supply $350 million, but in addition to that, had to pull a NFL G4 loan in the amount of $200 million. And that got him in, of course, at $550 million to start versus the $850 million being paid by taxpayers. That caused some consternation with folks thinking, oh, how could that be so much, and why did the owner get such a great deal? Well, the fact is that the stipulations of the deal that any cost overruns that would occur would be the responsibility of Terry Pegula and the Bills. And indeed, the cost of the stadium escalated to $1.7 billion, essentially with a post-COVID inflation and a pre-build situation. So that $300 extra million actually was required to be paid by Terry Pegula and the Bills when it became due. So now we've got a stadium that's at $1.7 billion, as I said. Then there was another increase. This is after we got into the build. We've got inflation. Labor costs are going up. Material costs, so forth and so on. We end up finally with a $2.26 billion stadium. Again, Terry Pegula and the Bills responsible for that overage. So what ends up happening is now that they've got to come up with another $560 million, Terry Pegula actually has to increase his G4 loan amount over the amount allowed by the NFL for teams to be in debt over stadium builds, and had to increase that and then also promise more money into the deal to cover the $2.26 billion, where now, since he is at $1.21 billion, he's paying for 53% of the stadium. And folks, of course, are going, well, that's still not a bad deal. He's getting to own it, isn't he? No, he's not. The stadium will be owned by the state of New York. And after it is completed and handed over to the Bills, New York State will be responsible for all maintenance, upkeep, and repair of the stadium going forward. Now, we get into the other escalations required. Terry Pegula is also committed to $144 million in a community benefits package that will span the 30-year lease of the stadium. Now, of course, that's the 30 years that the Bills will be leasing the stadium back from the state of New York. So Terry is not owning the stadium. Again, let's make that absolutely clear. And this, of course, is a shift from the current arrangement where the county of Erie owns the existing Highmark Stadium. This, of course, will be New York State owning it. And so the idea that he's got such a great deal, he's actually going to have to lease the stadium from the state of New York that he's paid 53% for. So I don't want to hear any more about how the costs are that out of whack. Now, taxpayers still complain, well, that was $600 million from the state of New York that was required for the stadium, and that's going to Western New York and Buffalo. Well, I got a couple of pieces of news for you. Number one, that $600 million that came from the state of New York, $418 million of it were funds seized from the Seneca Nation that were due to the state of New York because the state of New York was operating 3 different casinos for the Seneca Nation. It had not paid them, and these funds were long overdue. They were seized. So therefore, $418 million of that $600 million came from the Seneca Nation. Thank you very much. The other $172 million is actually out of straight tax dollars from the state of New York, which maybe still seems like a lot, but this little county of Erie, where Buffalo is located, is paying $250 million in tax dollars as opposed to the $172. And for people in New York State, not around Western New York, that are complaining about that tax amount, give me a break. You've got 2 NFL teams that both have New York in their first name, neither of which play in the state of New York. And yet New York State benefits tremendously from those teams being there, from the income that comes to businesses and the entire infrastructure based on having NFL teams that are right there, but across the river. So the Buffalo Bills are the only team in the NFL that's in New York State. So give me a break about what the cost is for paying $172 million for the best stadium there will actually be, where we can't even hardly get the turf changed at MetLife, and those 2 teams both play at the same building. So I'm done hearing about it. Okay, speaking of costs, let's get to one that's a sore subject for many Bills fans, and that is PSLs, or private seat licenses. The Bills have joined 20 other NFL teams that are engaged in a PSL program. So that's most of the league. Right now, just the Bills and the Tennessee Titans are constructing stadiums. The Washington Commanders will also enter the PSL conversation shortly with their planned construction of a new stadium that I believe is in the $3.4 billion range. Shame they're spending another $1 billion on it, because it'll never be as good as this new stadium we're building here in Orchard Park. Sorry, guys, but that's the truth. Now, the PSL situation is difficult because it is a new thing for the Bills. It's something that was never done for the original stadium. And speaking of which, the original stadium only cost $22 million. That's 1/100th of the cost of the new stadium. So there's really no wonder that there was a PSL requirement. And by the way, that $22 million today in 2025 would be worth about $160 million in today's dollars, meaning that the cost of the original stadium, even in today's dollars, is 7.27% of the cost of the new facility. Yes, it's expensive, and yes, it's great, and yes, that's why there are PSLs. But it's necessary because the Bills are trying to raise $400 million, which of course is ambitious with the second smallest market in the league compared to Dallas, who was, like I said, was trying to raise $500 million. And if you want to look at comparison, the Giants and Jets currently have raised about $371 million and $293 million respectively, making the Bills amount ambitious. But of course, Buffalo, I think, has more dedicated fans than those other 2 clubs, especially being in the market that we're in. Now, the Bills are doing well on PSLs. About half of them are sold, just about 25,000 or over 25,000 PSLs have been sold, and that would include all of the club seating in about half of the lower bowl. Now, the PSLs were reduced, that is the number of PSLs the Bills could make available, had to be reduced by about 6% to, I believe, 54,000 in order to accommodate requirements for sponsorships and away team seating and so forth in the stadium. So the Bills are, like I said, almost 50% through their sales process. Another year to go. They're doing well with it. Now, the Bills, again, they're on the low end of the PSL situation. On ticket prices, not so much. I believe the ticket price average for the Bills last season was $419, which ranks pretty high in the league. On the low end, you would have had the Falcons at the bottom with a $196 average ticket price. And our favorite team, the Kansas City Chiefs, have a $577 ticket price. Now, there's no forecast available on the new ticket prices for the 2026 season. I imagine they are going to be higher than they were for the existing stadium because the new one, like I said earlier, costs about 100 times more, even in today's dollars. All right, for our last segment in this stadium diatribe, I'm going to talk about the naming rights. And to me, naming rights are a money grab and kind of wrong. I've believed that for a long time. But unfortunately, the Buffalo Bills are perhaps guilty of getting this whole business started back in 1973 because the Rich Stadium, Rich Products naming rights deal, which was $1.5 million over 20 years, about $60,000 per year, I believe, that was one of the first naming rights deals. And actually, Rich Products wanted to name the stadium some ridiculous thing, Rich Products Fun Field or something like that. Fortunately, Ralph Wilson put a stop to that. But nonetheless, it opened as Rich Stadium. And then, of course, we moved through another period where the stadium was called Ralph Wilson Stadium without a corporate sponsor. And then we got into New Era for a while. And then, of course, now it's been Highmark. And Highmark is going to be the naming rights sponsor for the new stadium also. In fact, they've already tried out one of the letters. Now, naming rights are costs that vary amongst different teams in the league. On the high end, the very highest in the league, we've got SoFi Stadium, where SoFi pays both the Rams and the Chargers 15 point some million apiece. I think the overall deal per year is $31.25 million from SoFi in order to have their name on the stadium. Now, on the other hand, the Bills have allowed Highmark to have their name on the stadium. Highmark Health, of course, a Western New York institution. Their name has been on the stadium for $5 million per year. And sources say that the new deal for the naming rights for the new stadium, the new Highmark Stadium, as it were, will be about $6 million per year. So that is not extremely high on the overall ledger of naming rights costs across the league. But the fact is that AT&T, for example, is second at $18 million plus, and the average is $8 to $10 million. So the Bills are not that far off that at $6 million a year if that's what they get from Highmark. Now, unfortunately, that's going to be the case, but I've got an alternate plan here. First of all, we've talked about PSLs, where fans are investing in the stadium, essentially. And then we're going to have tickets where you're investing in the Bills being able to lease that stadium every year. Now, if the naming rights deal is $6 million per year, the Bills in a 9-game home game season at the stadium would seat about 540,000 fans. That would be 60,000 times 9 games. And those 540,000, if you added $1.11 to each one of those tickets throughout the course of the season, that's your naming rights bill of $6 million. And rather than calling it Highmark, if we had the fans do that and Bills Mafia be able to name the stadium properly, the Ralph, then we would have a good situation going on. Now, if Green Bay can own their club, why can't Bills Mafia own the naming rights for the stadium? So I'm going to start a movement to have that small amount added on to each ticket, if Bills Mafia will accept it, in exchange for having the stadium properly named and getting the corporate name off the face of the stadium. Let's do it right from the start. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's podcast and our stadium dissertation. If you like this content and you enjoyed listening and watching, I urge you to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and go ahead and click like. It doesn't take but a second and helps out the channel very much. I'll be back soon with another edition of the Ralph Rant. Thanks so much for watching this one. Go Bills. I'm out.